kind of who they are, what they do, why they're such an expert at copy editing, right? And then we're all going to share also like a pet peeve of grammar that just digs at us every time. So I'm Brittany, I'm a freelance editor, and my pet peeve is when M dashes are not formatted correctly. So let's go ahead and have Beth go next.
All right, so my name is Beth Buck. I am the Director of Acquisitions at Immortal Works Press, which is an indie publisher based here in Utah. And my pet peeve is actually, my biggest pet peeve isn't necessarily grammatical. It's when people use the term somehow. Like, it was as if it was something somehow. It's just I've actually seen that in some of my queries that I've gotten, and it's just, there's some phrases like that, they're just so overused, it's just like, just delete. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. Let's go to Chris next.
Fantastic. My name's Chris Jones. I'm actually not a copy editor, although I do a bunch of copy editing. I'm a professor of logic, writing, and rhetoric at Mount Liberty College. I'm also a novelist and a nonfiction writer. I ghostwrite. I do magazine articles, all kinds of writing, and I also teach junior high. And that means I see an enormous amount of horrible writing, which, no offense to my junior high kids, some of whom are probably watching right now. I'm not talking about you. It's the other people that I'm talking about. My pet peeve, honestly, is when people compose in Google Docs because Google Docs does not know how to punctuate dialogue. So when you get a capital letter at the beginning of a piece of a phrase that is supposed to be part of the longer sentence, I know Google Docs has been formatting your document, and cleaning that stuff up is incredibly hard because there's no search replace that will fix it. So you got to go and shoot them onesie twosies. And believe me, if I have to do that for more than an hour, you're not going to get a good grade. So that's my pet peeve.
Awesome. All right, let's go to Kaela.
Hi. Okay, so I am the author of Sicilios in the Desert of Souls. It comes out in April. And when I'm not writing about desert secrets and exciting fantasies, I work at my day job as a content editor for a marketing company. So content editor, copy editor, like the titles are a little bit different each, but I do have many grammar pet peeves. But I'm also kind about them, I like to think. So probably my number one is just when people do not know the difference between hyphens and N dashes and M dashes. So like all of the number ranges, you just find all of them and you're like N dashes, N dashes, N dashes. Yeah. You have to go through all of them. Yeah, I have a great love for each hyphen and each N dash and each M dash. So I want them to have their own identities, you know?
I really relate to that, Kaela, on a personal level. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump into talking about cleaning up grammar and punctuation. So we're going to start by just trying to kind of define better the different levels of editing because, I mean, hopefully you already know about this, but I know some people here might not know. So we're going to talk about, just really briefly, give an overview of the differences between developmental editing, substantive or content line editing, and then copy editing and proofreading. So anybody want to take a stab at just kind of like giving us a quick definition of those different areas?
I can. Okay, so like the most important one, well, they're all very important, really, but probably the first one you should be looking at is substantive editing, plot, characters, making sure arcs are completed, you know, that the book actually feels like a book when you're reading it, that kind of stuff. Then you move down to sort of line editing, where you're looking at the wordage, the sentences, how things flow, like how they read on a very like line level. And then you move down into like copy edits, and there can be even lots of little things in between them, but I like to think those are the major tiers. You move down to copy editing, that's when you're looking at grammar, that's when you're looking at accuracy, punctuation, things like that, before you go into, of course, usually a proof.
Yeah, perfect. Anything to add, Beth or Chris? Yeah.
I was going to ask Beth, do you sometimes find that in the copy editing work that you do that you need to reverse the process a little bit if the copy editing really needs to get out of the way so that you can actually focus on whether the characters are working in the story, whether the language is beautiful? Do you find that sometimes? Because I do. I get that sometimes.
Oh yeah. So most of what I do with Immortal Works is I look at the queries and like the first 5 pages, and if it has really bad copy editing, like grammatical mistakes, like those little nitpicky things, they pull me out of the story, and it's like, you know what? I don't want to request the rest of this, and so I'll just send a rejection letter. And sometimes I feel, I'll be honest with you, and candid here, a lot of the time I end up feeling like the wicked stepmother, like F minus no blah. Yeah, because well, you know, I do understand that when people query, their book is like their baby, you know, and it's really I understand how it's difficult sometimes to separate your work from your self-worth, right? And so I have a hard time. I mean, I send the rejection letter anyway, but I do feel bad about it.
Well, that's okay then.
You have compassion.
Yeah, right.
You just, you know.
I have compassion for it. Yeah. And so then a lot of the time when I do get that, like the cleaned up manuscript, and it might be free of errors, but then still has like really gaping plot holes, or like there's one that I read recently. It was about a science fiction-y sort of thing, or a kid who wrote science fiction, and so there was a whole science fiction short story right in the middle of the manuscript that had nothing to do with anything else. And yeah, I thought that was grimaces. Oh, yes. Yes.
Cool. Well, great thoughts, everybody. Let's talk about this a little bit more, just about the timing of copy editing. Obviously, it's not the thing you should be focusing on when you have huge plot holes like that, but you also don't want your query to be full of all these grammatical errors either. So how can our writers find the balance of knowing when to focus on grammar and how much even to focus on that?
I'll take that one because that's a question that I deal with every day. When I'm dealing with young writers, I have junior high kids, high school kids, college kids, and a lot of them have never really done any serious writing. They've never really. I mean, you ask the class, you know, how many of you want to write a book, and like, you know, every hand in the room goes up. And, you know, how many of you actually have written more than 20 pages of a book, you know, and all the hands go down, except for the one in the back, you know, it was like, I'm working on my 7th novel now. There's always the one, you know. So I will typically tell the kids, what I want you to do first is write as much as you can and keep going until you're done. And then we can go back and look at stuff. And what inevitably will happen, and I really think it's inevitable, as we go through the year and as they keep working on, maybe it's a novella or a novelette or whatever, you usually don't encourage them to try to write, you know, a Brando Sando to start with. Like, you know, if you're writing 380,000 words, that's amazing. But I can't teach you anything then because I don't know how to do that. So, but if you're going to write 40, 50, 60 pages, by the time you get to the end of that, the writing has changed considerably because I'm mostly dealing with young writers. So, but I would tell, really, the advice that I give to pretty much anybody is keep writing, get the words on the page. And if your grammar is not strong, if your spelling is not strong, that's okay when you're getting started, when you're just learning to put the words on the page. But obviously, that's going to have to be cleaned up. Obviously, you know, as Beth was saying, if you get a query like that, and I do acquisitions editing as well for Dramatic Press, and you know, if you send me a query letter that's filled with grammatical errors, I'm going to assume you don't know how to write, which may not be fair. and yet that's the assumption that I'm going to make. So eventually you're going to want to clean that stuff up. But I would say, and I don't know what Kaela or Beth would say, but my general advice at the beginning, at least, is get the words on the page, and then we'll worry about the rules and the grammar and the style and all of that stuff later. What do you ladies think about that?
Do you want to go first? Kaela?
What?
Oh, I'm inviting you to go first.
Oh, okay. Yes, I can do that. Thank you. That's so nice. So I would say the same thing. Like, I would support that. Like, when you're first starting out writing, definitely just focus on learning to write. I would say that sort of the rules of revision and editing change a little bit depending on where you are in your process. Like, let's say you finished your book and you're like, okay, I would like to send it out to people now. If it is your first draft, do not, please. Please read through it. Focus on substantive editing. Like, copy editing should be the thing you do basically right before you send it out, because it's the last thing you do, because there should be so many levels of editing before that. Copy editing is when you make it all look professional. That's when you send out the query letter that doesn't deter anybody, because they're not afraid of the time cost that it's going to take to edit your book. Because you're like, don't worry, I have gone through every level. I have done my due diligence. Copy editing is the thing that makes it all nice. It's the polishing and the sanding that makes the level difference between something that's good and something that's professional. That's what I would say.
I agree. And sometimes, like, I'll get a manuscript that's really well done, and there'll still be maybe one or two typos in there. But that's okay, because there's only one or two. That tells me that the author has really done a lot of work in polishing it. And I do notice them, but and I think that's why it's important to right, yeah. But I think that's why it's important to do that level of editing, is because as I'm reading, it's almost like you're skating with your rollerblades, and then each little grammatical error or wrong word or wrong use of the word to, TOTWO, it's like a big rock in the road, and so you're skating, and then you trip over it and you go, no! And so yeah, and so that's why it's important to do that. But yes.
Great thoughts from everybody. Oh yeah, Kaela, go ahead.
I just something that you said in your initial question when you were also asking about balancing how much you need to focus on grammar and stuff like that in general, like as a writer. I would say that you don't always have to be focusing on your grammar and stuff like that in your novel. Like, you don't have to be doing it like that all the time. You can also be learning grammar off to the side as a part of learning your craft. And I would actually suggest that, like, buy Chicago manual style. If you can't, borrow it from a library. Like, get the Chicago manual style, the latest edition, 17th, and start learning those things, because they come so in handy, because you start to be like, oh, I've always wondered why you use the comma there. And then you find out, and it's amazing. And once you know that, you start to subconsciously implement it in your first drafts even, and things like that. So you empower yourself as you write, instead of having to consciously, like, every time be like, let me just do super rough, no grammar draft, and then have to redo it and things like that. That's part of growing as a writer, I think, is starting to study and research off to the side as well, and that will naturally elevate your craft as you write.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Learning about grammar does make your writing stronger, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about some of the specific things that we look for when we're copy editing. We've kind of mentioned commas and dashes and different things. So can you guys think of any specific mistakes that people make often that maybe we could try to clarify a couple little things that they should look for?
Use of semicolons. I see that a lot. I think it's because Stephanie Meyer uses semicolons quite a lot.
Yes.
I would venture to say she mostly uses them correctly, but she uses them a lot. And so I guess I don't know if that contributes to the perceived notion of their trendiness, but I've seen them used at where there should be a comma. I've seen them used as a substitute for parentheses. The cringing, yes. So just so everybody knows, a semicolon is used when you have two sentences that can be kind of mushed together. So
that semicolon holds them together like a big hug.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
If you take the semicolon out and
regular colon.
if you take the semicolon out and insert a period, and both sentences do not make sense by themselves, that's the wrong place for a semicolon. But I have to say, Beth, semicolons have never been trendy. They have never, ever been trendy. And even the power of Stephanie Meyer cannot make semicolons trendy. They can make them socially acceptable, but that's about as far as you can go. And really, most people don't, you don't see a lot of semicolons in most novel writing. But what you do see more and more now, and you didn't see this really until, I don't know whether it's the late 1970s, the 80s, is the M dash. And that's one we've both of you ladies mentioned, the M dash. Word is really good about formatting M dashes correctly, but Google Docs, once again, does not know that the double hyphen is supposed to then be turned into a slightly longer horizontal line, but not as long as an N dash, which is a different piece of punctuation. But a lot of people will use that, it was almost the way you used to use parentheses. And it's a very sort of informal kind of way of breaking up your sentences. And I really like them. I use them a lot. And I see them a lot. I see them in a lot of very popular fiction. The difficulty, though, is making sure that you're actually setting off a piece of a sentence that is, and you're not creating a whole nother paragraph in between and getting lost in multiple. I've seen manuscripts where there are nested M dashes, and M dashception is not a thing. Okay, you go one level and that's it. You don't get to M dash like 40 times in a set. That's not going to work. But an M dash is sort of like, for people who don't know what I'm talking about, it's sort of halfway in between a comma and a semicolon. It's a pause.
Very versatile punctuation.
It is, yeah, and therefore difficult to figure out how to get it right. One of the things that I advise on that is to read it out loud. Then we'll go through and read your manuscript aloud to someone who has never read the story. An immense number of things will occur when you do that. And one of those is that you'll be pausing in the wrong places. You'll notice that then that punctuation is not serving you and you need to move it around or whatever. Of course, you'll also see all the clunky bits where you didn't explain who Barbara was when she starts talking in the middle of page 4, stuff like that. But I think the M dash is really has become a very popular form of punctuation, and it's one that I don't remember ever being taught about when I was in school. So it's one of those things you sort of have to pick up from experience, and ideally, this is something I would recommend as well, submitting to somebody like Beth, who's an actual copywriter, and take Beth out for a swig and say, will you read a page of this and mark the living daylights out of it so that I can see where I'm messing stuff up? That can be really helpful.
I agree.
Oh
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I keep interrupting. For writers, I admittedly do not remember the phrase of your question. Actually, can you say it again?
Yeah. So just any sort of like common errors or mistakes that writers could try to be aware of and learn more about so that their writing can be cleaner.
Right. So that reminds me of something that I do for my writers where I work. And that is, every writer is different. So their common problems are going to be different too. So I actually make a list for each of my writers of what their common issues are so that I can remember to check them. And I do it for myself too as an author. Like I'm like, you always forget, you always switch form and from. For some reason, you always type the wrong one. And so like you keeping a list like that for yourself is really helpful. So I would suggest getting to know what your problems are, because once you know what your problems are, you can tackle them, and then it empowers you as a writer.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea.
I really like that.
I think that also makes it easier for writers to be able to then go out and research and learn about these problems because they know what to look for. That's great. Okay, any last thoughts about just maybe some common errors that writers can look for?
I see a lot of problems with punctuating dialogue, and this may sound persnickety. Like I remember thinking, why does this stuff matter? Like, but readers notice, readers pay attention, and if you don't get the punctuation right, and understand, like even. I mean, if you're going to self-publish, great, and you're going to deplete, but please don't both self-publish and self-edit. That's not like you need someone else to help you with one of those two things. But if you're submitting to a publisher, you're the first person who is going to read your manuscript is going to be a graduate of a program where they have drilled the use of grammar, punctuation, and spelling. And if you screw it up, that person will take immense pleasure in destroying your manuscript and delivering you. Now, Beth is very nice, okay, but Beth is not representative of the species. Let me just say, they will take immense pleasure in destroying your manuscript and passing pages around the office for people to stick on their walls and laugh at. I am not kidding, and I am not making that up. Okay, if you spent 80 grand getting an MFA from Vassar, the first thing you want to do is find people who don't know enough about the high priesthood of grammar to get their manuscript into your editors, and they will savage it, and you will never. Like your manuscript will go nowhere. And please understand, if you're going to be sending to editors, you may think it's not a big deal, but I guarantee the people who are reading, they do think it's a big deal. That's why they're editors. Yeah. So get it right, or get someone else who can get it right.
So I'll share a story about that, if I may. And so I try really hard not to do this, but a lot of the time I will get queries that are just so bad that they're beautiful, and so I have to share them. I got one a couple years ago. This lady said that she had already received an offer of publication, but she was shopping around wanting to find a better offer. And so I opened up her first 5 pages, and it was obvious in the first 3 sentences that there was no way that anybody had picked that up. There were I'm not making this up, 3 misused semicolons, bad punctuation, and a sentence fragment. And yeah, it was so even after reading only 3 sentences, that was all the information that I needed about this book. And it was all the information I needed to know about that author also. I didn't rub it in her face. However, it was really obvious that she was lying about the status of her submission. And that's not somebody that I want to work with, and probably not somebody that anybody wants to work with.
Yeah. I'd just say a quick note before I guess we're going into questions next. To remember what the importance of grammar is. It's not people being nitpicky, although yes, we are nitpicky, but we're gloriously nitpicky to help you. but it's not for the sake of it. It's not for the sake of being nitpicky. It's not because we're like, well, you misplaced his comma. It's not what it's about. Grammar is the convention by which people understand what's going on in punctuation in a story. If you pick up a British book, you will be confused for a little bit because the way that they format dialogue is different. That happened to me. My grandmother is British, and she sent me a British Harry Potter book, and I was very confused for the first 5 chapters, but I was like, I think I know what's going on. Most of the time, just because the convention had changed for me, and it was a convention that everybody understood over there, but not me. Right. So if there are conventions in books, it's important to learn the grammar. It's important to learn the formatting and structure so that you can be understood, because that's the whole point of reading, is that we are understanding each other, And
if I can give an example of that, it's because as a writer, you want to share your vision, but if you want to describe an old man with white hair and glasses, you have to make sure that the word order doesn't make it sound like the old man has white hair coming out of his glasses.
That's important.
Yes.
Very different character.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Yeah, really great thoughts. So going along with this idea that these conventions of grammar and punctuation and all these things go into how we understand writing, what is the line between following these conventions and developing your own style?
This looks very excited about this.
Yeah.
Well, my editor actually in the first my first novel, Trinity Flynn and the 5 Points Gang, I used British punctuation. I used British dialect punctuation because I feel like the British punctuation style actually makes more sense, that their rules are actually better. They make more sense in the modern context than some of these punctuation rules go back to how you bracket things for printing. I mean, when we were stamping big broadsheets and stitching them together by hand, so some of this stuff doesn't necessarily make sense. But the question is, does this advance the story? Grammar serves us by making our meaning clear. Punctuation serves us by making our meaning clear. Does it advance the story? And you can pull best-selling novels off the shelf, and they've violated every grammar rule you can think of, but they did it in service of telling a story in a compelling way, not because they don't know what the rules are. That's where I think some of that difference is. And I actually had to include a character note at the beginning of the novel. My editor insisted that I do this, that said, this is not her fault, that the punctuation on the dialogue was insisted on by the character herself, and that we had no control over this, and so please don't blame us for using British convention. So, but the point, okay, that's funny, and people read that and haha, but then see what happens is Kaela doesn't spend the first 4 chapters trying to figure out what the heck is going on. You're like, oh, this is going to be a little different. So we tried to do it in a humorous way. I think grammar can serve us that way, and that's its point. You just don't want somebody to be rolling along in the middle of your suspense novel, and you've got dangling participle or a misplaced modifier that changes the sense of the sentence, or you've got a semicolon in the wrong place that breaks the rhythm of the thing in your head as you're reading, and all of a sudden the reader is outside going, wait, what did that sentence mean? And you lose them. That's why you have to get it clean. That's why you've got to polish it up, because if you don't do that, it's like a splinter in your hand when you're using a hoe. You can't use the hoe anymore, even though the rest of it seems like it's fine. You can't, because now you got to get that out, and that's what is death for a writer, and that's what the best writers never do. Even if they have their own style, they never pull you out of the story because they don't understand how to make these rules serve them, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I think what you've brought up is a lot has to do a lot with character voice. I can think of so many examples where a character will use, shall we call it, alternative spelling and a lot of grammatically incorrect colloquialisms. And from a grammatical standpoint, it's like, oh no, the grammar. But it works because that's the character. That's what they sound like. That's who they are.
It's a great point.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts from you, Kaela?
I mean, both of them have pretty much covered it, but I guess I would also say that, like, try to avoid falling into the trap that I think we all start in, where we're like, but it's my style. You can't blame everything on style. The better you get at grammar, the more you'll start to see the difference between your style and what's grammar, and what grammar is helpful, and what things you can twist in order to, like, have an effect. Like fragments. You'll see fragments, which are incomplete sentences in, like, published novels. I have them in mine. That's fragments. But you'll also notice some people use them more and some people use them less. That's style. And some people will only use them to make an impact. Also style. So, like, sometimes you use extra commas when you're in dialogue because you're trying to show the fact the person's like, I use a lot of M dashes in my dialogue because I love capturing that my characters are very awkward. There are things like that, but you have to use them carefully. And so sometimes I'll even cut out M dashes around my dialogue in order to make it stand out there so that I'm not, like, repeating myself too much, because that becomes a rhythm that I'm not looking for. So get good, G-U-D at grammar. And, like, it's going to take time. So be patient with yourself too.
Yeah.
Like that. That's a skill people develop, just like anything. So, but just know that as you do, you'll start to learn the difference between style and grammar, and be interested in learning the difference instead of excusing things for style. Maybe it's just you put the semicolon in the wrong place.
And if I could make a comment about justifying it as style, it was actually a series of several emails quite some time ago. Sometimes Immortal Works, the publisher I work for, we're an indie press, and we're very small. And sometimes we get confused as a vanity press, which we are not. And so I got a series of emails from this one person asking, hey, will you edit my book for me if I decide to publish with you? And I said, okay, well, first we have to accept it for publishing. And they're like, okay, well, so I'm just thinking that I have a hard time telling the difference between TO and TWO and TOO. Will you fix that for me? And I had said, well, if you're having difficulty with that, then maybe Immortal Works is not the right publisher for you. Because then the onus is on us to fix your grammar, to make it into a product, because let's be really honest, like, we're wanting to make money here on these stories. And so if we don't want to have to spend a whole ton of extra money and extra time fixing your style, when really it's not style, it's just bad grammar.
Great.
So that sounded wicked stepmothery. I'm sorry.
Sometimes that's what it takes to clean up the grammar, right?
Yeah.
Direct and clear. That's what we do as editors, I feel you.
Yeah. But then I find, like, the perfect, beautiful, just wonderful noir story, and then I feel like the fairy godmother. So
I love it. Okay. I know we have a few questions that have come up in the chat, so let's go ahead and start answering those. I want to make sure we have time to hopefully get to all of them. And then if more questions come up, we can hit those too.
Okay, so Michael asks, what are the tiers or types of editing? I heard Kaela say copy editing was last, but I didn't catch the first levels.
Ooh, okay. I'll just jump into that if that's cool. Okay. So the tiers of editing, the very first one, which I say it's the most important. It's not, they're all very important, but it's the first one and one people usually forget, so I emphasize it, is substantive editing. substantive editing. And that is where you're doing all of the big work. Like that's when you're like, hey, your main character arc sort of takes a break in the middle. Like we should probably hem that up. This is a bit too long. Chapter 3 scenes too chapter 3 just doesn't need to be there. The plot needs tightening up with the main antagonist. That's where you make all the big changes. So it's substantive, as you might call it. You might hear it referred to as a few other ways, but substantive is,
Developmental is a common term.
Right, developmental editing, substantive editing. They're the same thing. We use different terms for it. So just know that they're just the same guy in the different cloak. And then the one after that is line editing. Line editing is where you're looking at prose quality. So you're not looking at grammar yet. You might catch it while you're doing that too. But line editing is about flow. Like, this paragraph's just dragging on a bit too long. Or like this description doesn't really make sense. Or we don't have description over here and probably need to know what this character looks like. Things like that. So that's when you're looking at flow, sentence structure, quality of description, things like that. And then you move into copy editing. And there is, after copy editing, always a proof as well, just by the way. So you should probably proof your stuff too after you've copy edited it, just in case, because sometimes you're tired when you're copy editing and you've missed something.
Great. Michael asks, reading a style guide is a bit of a tough read from front to back. Are there exercises that I can do to help learn grammar?
I also answer this one. Sorry, I'm really excited about this one.
Yeah.
I'm a total nerd for this one particularly. Oh, because I love doing this. Okay. So you're right. Style, do not read the Chicago Manual style front and back. That one's really hard. I would say lean heavily on your natural curiosity and learn to ask more questions about yourself as you're writing. Like when you're like, I'm going to put an M dash here, and then be like, is that where an M dash really goes? Do I know how to use that M dash that way? Then go look up the M dash in your style guide. And then when you're looking at something and you're like, oh, I'm not sure where to put the comma here, be like, maybe I should look up the comma rules. These are take opportunity, because there's nothing better than when you're writing something or when you're editing something or when you're writing or editing something for somebody else. That's always very helpful. Taking the time to look. There have been so many words that I thought I knew how they were said until I stopped and was like, is that hyphenated? And then I went and looked in Merriam-Webster, and if I couldn't find my answer there, I'd be like, okay, well, let me go to the hyphen. There is an entire hyphen map in Chicago Manual style, by the way. At my work, we have joked about getting tattoos of it, but it just wouldn't fit on a human body, So I don't recommend that. And it updates too much, so you get out of date real fast. Don't do that. But lean on your natural curiosity, I would say, and start asking more questions. The more you write, the more you edit, the more you're looking at. Even if you're you're reading a book, maybe this book, and you turn in, and you're like, do I know why that works? Suddenly, maybe, you're like, wait a second. Are there actually spaces between ellipses? There are. By the way, there are spaces between ellipses, each period in the ellipses. But start asking yourself those questions, and that's going to take time too. So again, be patient with yourself, but start cultivating that practice is what I would suggest.
Any other thoughts from Beth or Chris on that?
I think I was actually just thinking that Kaela, you are so amazing and charming, and I just love hearing you talk about it.
It's cute.
We can nerd out together, Beth.
It's pretty cute. Yeah, editors are your friends. One of the reasons, all of us, we do editing because we love it, and because the beauty of the language is important to us, and really in service of language, in service of the beauty of English, as tumorized a language as it is, and as polyglot a tongue as we get words from everywhere. But that's what gives English, I think, some of its flexibility, some of its poetic capacity, and that's what we're looking for in the manuscript anyway. We want to see the language serve the story, and the more you're able to use those tools, the more you practice them. Use the editors, the people that you know that love editing, that are a grammar nerd is sort of like somebody who does CrossFit. They won't be able to shut up about it if you get them started. So you can find us. Like if you give the appropriate call on the prairie, we'll poke our heads up and say, whoa. So, try misspelling a post on Facebook or something like that. I guarantee, your friends will jump out and say, and then send them a page of stuff and say, what can I do here? And what are some of the rules that I need to work on? I really thought keeping a list, I thought that was a great idea, to keep a list, of here are things that I screw up all the time. Going through a formal editing process. Eschler does a great job. They're really very kind. And they sponsor a lot of stuff for LTUE and various other, writing conferences here. I really recommend them, but there's lots of them. I mean, they're all over the place. And please use those. I mean, submit them a page of text and or a couple of pages or whatever, and submit yourself to the rigor of figuring out why they've marked it all up. If you weren't lucky enough to have Mrs. Russell as your senior English teacher, like I was, and a father who was a copy editor and an absolute grammar Nazi, I couldn't tell my father how my day went at school without making sure that I had everything, lined up like it was a doctoral thesis, but not everybody had that opportunity. And, but you can have it. Like, we're here and we love doing this stuff. We really will help you. And we don't like to say it, but really we're insanely cheap. I mean, most of the people want us to do it for free. If you buy us a soda, we're probably good, Learn the tools. It's part of the craft. You would not go and try to build a house if you didn't know how a nail gun worked. So learn how the nail gun works and which nails you use for which kinds of projects before you decide, I'm a pro because I wrote a book. That's not how this works, people.
So if I could also break in, so Chris, you mentioned just like buy us a soda. So I like if you query me, then I have no problem, and I do this often, especially if I can tell that you're like an earnest young writer. I have no problem taking like an extra 20 minutes to give you like a really nice critique of your query and your first 5 pages. So I don't have time. I don't always do that every time, but I do it a lot. So like, send me a query.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, Immortal Works is great. Those guys are really, really good. I've never published with them, so I mean, I have no dog in this fight. But I actually published with a competing publisher, small Utah Press. But I'm really impressed with Immortal Works. Everybody that I've met there is a real pro, and their authors are real pros, and their books are good. They're fun to read, and I recommend it. Yet send Beth stuff. I mean, if she works for them, she knows her stuff. I'm telling you, she does. Make use of that.
Hashtag query Beth.
Look at you with the wow.
I'm in my 20s.
Lovely. Okay, let's have another question.
Wolf Spider asks, is Grammarly any good for fixing novel grammar as you write?
Pretty good.
I actually really like Grammarly. I would actually say, like, Grammarly's blog is actually a great place to learn about grammar. Like, look up not only, but also parallelism. Like, nobody ever knows that thing, but it's a thing, and Grammarly has a great blog on it. I actually use it and send it in my editing to my writers. Like, it's actually a really good resource. I would not say put 100% of your stuff in there, because sometimes Grammarly is drunk and gets confused. Sometimes Grammarly is sleepy and gets confused. And that's just because, there are restrictions to an AI system because an editor or you will know the difference between the delivery here and the delivery there of something. No, you don't actually need a comma there. No, I did not mean to add a 2 there, things like that. So Grammarly has its restrictions, but it is actually a very good piece of software. We use it where I work.
It's not a substitute for knowing the rules yourself, but it's a good indication of what the rules are. Even Word, their latest patches on their grammar stuff, if you turn the grammar correction on, I don't always take the suggestions, but anymore it's gotten to where it's pretty good. It has a pretty reasonable idea and at least it's saying, here's something hinky. Did you mean to do this? And that can be really valuable too.
Yeah, you're just bringing attention to it. I would personally say Grammarly is probably a little over Word's
definitely. It's definitely a cut above.
If we're gonna stack them, Grammarly I'd put on top.
Grammarly is being toward the top, definitely. Yeah.
Great.
Mary asks, I read a New York Times bestseller that had several parentheses on one page. How many is too many, and how did that author get away with it?
I don't have any answer to that. So the only thing I can think is that their editor probably thought it was okay because of style. But without knowing the context, I can't really say whether it was appropriate or not.
I'd second that. Just with a peek at behind the scenes in publishing also, sometimes things happen in the production line that you just don't know about, like when you're a consumer. Sometimes things are rushed more than expected, and sometimes sometimes editors are going through stuff, they have lives too. Yeah. And sometimes they're just like, you know what, the battle, sometimes it's even because it comes down between a battle between the author and the editor, and the author's like, I want all 70 parentheses on this page. And you're like, they're going to die on this hill. Okay, fine.
The Goldfinch, which I think is the book in the chat, it looked as if that was the book that was being discussed. The Goldfinch won a Pulitzer. How do I say this gently? Very often, books that are written for the purpose of winning awards like Pulitzers and Nobels and those sorts of things have arty kinds of grammar quirks in them that you are not going to get away with in your science fiction thriller. Okay, so if you're Lee Child and you write Jack Reacher novels, you don't get to do that. That's a completely different kind of thing. But if you write a navel gazer that's supposed to win all sorts of literary awards, I'm sorry, I also teach literature. So, I mean, we read these things, and very often, James Joyce did it. Most of these, we look at Hemingway did it. Their style is so radically different from what most other people are doing. That's why they ended up on all these literary bestseller lists. So you shouldn't necessarily take that as evidence that you're going to be able to get away with it. But on the other hand, if you're Donna Tartt and that's your style, and the Goldfinch sold, 2.8 million copies or something like that. I am never, ever going to criticize your grammar in a book that sells 2.8 million copies. That is beyond my pay grade at that point. So if you know how to do that and get away with it, awesome, go for it. I don't know how to do that.
Awesome. Really great advice, everybody. I don't think we have time for any more questions, but if anybody has any last thoughts about our whole discussion, or if you want to share maybe where you're going to be for the rest of the conference, let's kind of start wrapping things up.
So I have a panel tomorrow, which is on different revision drafts and stuff to do like that at 10 a.m. And I have a Strong Women as Protagonists on Saturday at 3. You can find me on Twitter. You'll probably find me, you can network with me on Twitter if you want to hang out, you want to chat, drink pink lemonade from afar. You can find me on Twitter. It's at Kaela _Rivera_ because I couldn't find a simpler username.
So let's see, I have a panel on emergency preparedness of all things. That's going to be at 4. And then I have another panel at 8 tomorrow, but I forget which one that is. And then I have a couple more on Saturday. You can query me at immortalworks.press/submissions. And I'll put that in the attendee chat too.
And I have 3 more panels. They range from, I think my last one is on Friday at 5, where we're talking about utopian dystopians, and how the future doesn't necessarily need to be bleak and dark in order to be interesting. I'm looking forward to that one, but I have one tomorrow at 1 o'clock in this same room, in the Anne McCaffrey room, and another one at 3 on Saturday, and another one at 5. And if you really have to ask me grammar questions, email. I'm old, so email is my thing. So that's Chris at iamchrisjones.com. It's a very complex email address. But I love to get questions, and so feel free to contact me.
Awesome. It's been such a pleasure hearing from all 3 of you. You're also delightful. And thank you again for all your thoughts and what you've taught us tonight. And that will be the end of this panel. Thanks everybody for coming.